Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Thursday, the 11th of April. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews, and I'll be adjudicating during the meeting. We need to do the housekeeping rules, so if I can pass over to the officer to read out the relevant notice.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast, and it will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest signed fire exit route and make your way to the car park at the front of the building. Finally, please could everybody ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Item 1 on the agenda, apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we've received apologies for this meeting from Councillor Richard Herritt, and we have Councillor Tarling here as substitute.
Well, sir, welcome, Councillor Tarling. Item 3, declarations of interest. Have there been any declarations of interest made? I don't believe there are, but if anybody wants to declare an interest, please do so now. Okay, moving swiftly on. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. The last meeting was on the 7th of March 2024, and they have been circulated with the agenda. We need to have them approved. So can I have a proposer to accept the minutes, please? Councillor Waite, thank you. And seconder, Councillor Castle, thank you very much. Item 5, public issues. Have there been any public questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received 2 public questions for this meeting from Mr. McKinstry and 2 public questions from Mr. Ian Redman. And I believe Mr. McKinstry is here to read out his questions and those from Mr. Redman.
Welcome, sir. Question 1, over to you.
Okay, shall I go through mine first then Mr. Redman's? Would that be ideal?
Yes, do yours first.
So, first of all, of the Freedom of Information Act requests received by BCP Council in 2023 to 24, how many were dismissed as vexatious and how many were reclassified as non-vexatious following a request for an internal review or referral to the ICO? If the number of reclassifications is significant, and I accept it might not be, is this a matter which is being discussed at Information Governance Board meetings? And if so, what lessons are being learned?
Thank you for that. For those who didn't know until I was briefed earlier this evening, ICO stands for Information Commissioner's Office. Anyway, to answer your question, there were 1,458 Freedom of Information / environmental information requests processed in 2023-24. Of these, none were refused under Section 14 vexatious. There were 2 requests dealt with under an internal review where Section 14 was applied after further consideration. There were no reclassifications overturning the Section 14 decisions to the internal review responses. Question number 2, please.
Okay. Of the 38 requests for internal reviews made in 2023 to 2024, how many responses to those requests were issued outside the 20 working day guideline recommended by the Information Commissioner's Office?
9 responses to internal reviews were not made within the ICO response guideline of 20 working days. Of these 9 responses, 8 were met within 40 days, including a 20-day working permitted extension for complex requests, consultation with third parties, or where a substantial amount of information is requested.
Okay, then we have 2 questions from Mr. Redman. The first one relates to agenda item 9, the Bayside recommendations. Why would aggregating activities?
Sorry, Chair, can I
Yes.
just intervene? Mr. Redmond sent, sorry, Mr. McKinstry for interrupting you. Mr. Redmond has sent 2 statements and they have not been allowed. So could I just check which questions that Mr. McKinstry has?
Okay, so well, I'll give you an outline of them without reading them out. The first question begins with the words, why would aggregating activities? And that relates to the Bayside recommendations, which is Appendix 2 to Item 9. And it begins, why would aggregating activities into larger packages?
Apologies, Chair. I just needed to check because Mr. Redmond has sent quite a few. And so, yes, these ones are permissible. Thank you. Sorry about that, Mr. McKinstry.
Sorry for the confusion there, but we had to double check.
No problem. Okay, so to resume, question 1 from Mr. Redmond. Why would aggregating activities into larger packages increase the number of potential providers on offer? I beg your pardon. Increase the number of potential providers and offer better value for money for the council through greater competition. Aggregating activities into larger packages might save work for the council by reducing the number of tenders, but larger packages are more likely to prevent smaller businesses taking part in the tender process, reducing competition and providing less choice for consumers.
Okay. The actual internal audit recommendation reads, R8, formal consideration should be given to aggregating activities into larger packages where possible, and appropriate to do so to increase the number of potential providers and potentially offer better value for money for the council through greater competition. End of quote. The key words in this recommendation are to consider and, where possible and appropriate. The recommendation does not imply that all activities should be aggregated. There is a fine balance to strike. Mr. Redmond is quite right that in certain situations, larger packages of activity may prevent smaller businesses from taking part in tendering or providing quotes, thus reducing competition and providing less choice for consumers. Conversely, however, in certain situations, if activity packages are too small, this can put off certain suppliers from making the effort to tender or to supply quotes, as any eventual return on this effort and on fixed costs incurred is considered insufficient reward. This is a simple economies of scale. Aggregation of activity into large tender opportunity packages can therefore, in certain appropriate situations, be beneficial to both overall value for money and increase competition. And I think there's another question from Mr. Redmond.
Okay, this relates to agenda item 6, so we're back on information governance. Performance management indicators do not measure the quality of FOI responses. There is no indication of customer satisfaction or the number of emails per FOI request. Dorset Council, like many local authorities, provide full details of all FOI requests on their website. Some local authorities even direct you to a list of recent FOIs before you can submit one. Will BCP follow the examples of best practice and start to publish in full all FOI requests and responses, hopefully in real time? This will not measure customer satisfaction, but it would improve transparency, reduce duplication, and improve the quality and professionalism of responses.
Okay. IG, or information governance, measure the quality of FOI responses through data recorded for internal reviews. This provides an indication of customer satisfaction through the quality of the first response. Table 1 shows that 1,458 requests were processed during 2023-24. Table 9 shows that the authority receives 38 requests for an internal review during 2023-24. From this data, we calculate that 97% of applicants were satisfied with the first response, and 3% were not satisfied and requested an internal review. We use the data recorded from the internal reviews to identify weaknesses and to help improve performance. The current system does not provide an audit of emails associated with each request. We know that 97% of requesters are satisfied with the first response requiring an average of 2 emails. Where an excessive number of emails are received associated to one request, placing a burden on resources, this will be referred to the IG team to investigate. The current system does not provide the ability to publish a disclosure log. This would be function sought in any new system in the future. And that's the end of the public questions. We now have some public statements. These have been submitted by Mr. Gatrell. Mr. Gatrell is not available to come here this evening, so I think the officer will be reading out the statements on his behalf.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first statement. Internal audit processes requiring inclusion in the 2024-25 work plan relating to the accuracy and integration of key accounting systems generating core data for the annual accounts. Capital adjustment account movements are noted in each statement of accounts except incongruously the second year 2020-21. Discrepancies exist between the notes and the latest source spreadsheets I obtained. Similarly, the notes do not identify as prior year restatements these adjustments made to expenditure reversal items. Increase in depreciation and impairment regarding the 2020-21 finalised accounts adjusted via the page 58 comparative column in the 2021-22 draft accounts being 2,305,339 more than the 2020-21 spreadsheet. Reduction in the non-current assets written off regarding the 2021-22 accounts adjusted in the 1st of April 2022 balance and the 2021-22 comparatives on page 56 of the 2022-23 draft accounts being 722,000 less than the 2021-22 spreadsheet. The page 56 comparative 2021-22 subtotals 83,678,000 and 95,995,000 each contain a £1,000 overcasting error.
Thank you for that. And there's a second statement from that gentleman. So if you could read that statement out, please, as well.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the Constitution's review, Monitoring Officers' Duties, Sections 5 and 5A, Local Government and Housing Act 1989. Constitution 11.3b on 224 is fundamentally incorrect because the monitoring officer must report to each member or to Cabinet where the executive arrangements apply. Regarding actual and potential contraventions of law as well as Ombudsman investigation decisions on maladministration or service failure. This reporting duty continues when not practicable for that officer to consult with the Chief Executive and Chief Finance Officer regarding the report. To ensure Council's effective accountability, sound decisions by members, including regarding contended inconsequential contraventions, are dependent upon correct recognition of relevant law and comprehensive compliance registers. Article 14.2 on 2/2029 empowers the monitoring officer to implement without referral necessary constitutional amendments. The current officer's preceding tenure at Birmingham Council affirms the necessary amendments identified above. In 26 words, Birmingham's constitution references correct application of sections 5 and 5A. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we also have a public statement from Mr. McKinstry. Could you read it out, please? Well, yeah, of course.
Okay. A development I've noticed recently, this is back to information governance, is for officers to provide updates to those who've submitted freedom of information requests if the statutory deadline is breached, and to provide the requester with any information thus far received. Though not ideal, this is a tremendous step forward and does provide some reassurance for requesters. So if the Information Governance Board could look towards adopting this as a default protocol, it would improve the FOI experience no mean degree. Happy ending. There we are.
Thank you for that. Thank you for attending the meeting. Moving on now to item 6, information governance update. It's an information governance update to the committee providing performance management information. We have joining us online Nigel Channer, who is the team leader of information governance. So Nigel, over to you, please.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for taking a look at this report this evening. If I could ask for indulgence, I'll just first explain the function of information governance, particularly for those who are not familiar with it, and just go and highlight through a couple of the tables the performance that we've experienced over the last 3 quarters. So information governance, in the paper, I've tried to explain that it describes how we manage our obligations as a council in relation to freedom of information, which has been a point of topic of discussion this evening, but also has areas of data protection and information sharing aspects as well in our day-to-day operations, as well as IT security. The object of the information governance is to ensure that both business and personal information is dealt with legally, securely, and efficiently and effectively in order to deliver the best possible outcomes and services for our area. Now, my role also includes that of being the data protection officer, which means that I assist the council to monitor internal compliance and advise our data protection obligations and activities on, for example, data protection, and carry out impact assessments. The IG team, they are primarily a point of contact, and they provide specialist advice around around information governance. And what they're doing is supporting the service units, who are the ones who receive those information requests. And we can see that in the table. But let me just finish by saying that the service units also have information asset advisors, and they're the ones on the ground in those units who have access to the specialist information around their topics, be it planning, be it housing, and also access to the members of their team where the information may rest. So they are the ones that largely respond to the freedom of information requests. We also have a forum for them, for IAAs is what we've described them, and in that forum they can access, ask questions, and we support that forum, and hopefully we also give some training through that forum as well. Now the IAAs, we also then have the information asset owners within those service units, and they tend to be more senior officers who also then are part of the information governance board. And it's the information governance board which provides the oversight, as we've seen this evening, around information governance for the whole of the council. So what we have in large part is a virtual team. So we are dealing with team members across various service units, and we come together to try and answer questions as best we can, as quickly as we can. So if we look at table 1, it shows us all the service requests across the board. So just bear with me. Hopefully you can turn to that, and he says. And it's an interesting breakdown, is what I'm trying to just ask members to observe, that each of the different units, what's the type of request that they get. So you can see there'll be disclosures. There are subject access requests, is what the SAR stands for, as well as FOI, which is freedom of information, and environmental request as well. So, and it gives a total for each of those sections. The following slide then shows us the response rate per quarter for each of those sections. So what I'd like to emphasize on that slide is to give credit to those units who have been consistent throughout the year, and they tend to be in the 90 percentile. And so that's great for us that they're able to do that. But we then have some inconsistencies across all the other units. And where we find those inconsistencies as an IG team, we then approach those heads of service, and we have a conversation around them and try to identify what the issues might be and see whether there's anything that we can help them as an IG unit. That includes my own law and governance team as well. So we all are trying to help each other. So one of the figures then that we arrive at is that what's our total? And so that's what I've highlighted in the report in section 4, is that over the year, we've arrived at 82%. And unfortunately, that's down from where we were in 2022-23, where it was at 88%. But it had improved there, you see. So we were hoping that we'd be able to advance on that and arrive in the 90th percentile. But first, let us just step to one side and say, well, how does that compare to other to the government, for example? So I took a look at the Information Commissioner's Office report that came out in March 23, and that looked at a report called the Freedom of Information Upstream Regulation Research paper, and that paper pointed out that they did a report over 2005 to 2010, and they discovered that the number of requests to English local councils had increased by 328% between 2005 and 2010, with an estimated 197,000 requests made to English councils at a cost of £159.80 per request. So again, we can see that there is quite a high demand across councils. And then I took a look at the government's response rate. And interestingly enough, their key statistics showed that over the course of 2022, I believe it is, I'm looking at, it was 86%. And in 2021, and then looking at July to September 2023, their notes say that they'd arrived at an 80% return rate on their responses. So there are some lessons for us to learn that we've picked up over the course of the period. And our observations in IG are that what we're finding is that we are trying to do a lot more with less, and that means with less people. So often times we find that our information and asset advisors, who are the first responders in this case and sort of triaging initially, are wearing multiple hats themselves and are desperately trying to balance their workloads across a number of functions. So we can see that there's quite a number of pressure on these units to get the response out as quickly as they possibly can. So one of the things we would like to see as a service unit is an improved case management system whereby we can provide the reports to yourselves and to the information government asset teams, as well as, for example, providing a disclosure log which will provide members of the public with greater access to the information. So the two key points I'd like to share with ask for the committee to note, first off, is that we've got a new management team in place, and that new management team are looking to review how the IG function works across BCP and looking to see that we can improve that service. The second point, of course, I'd like to point out, if the committee would please note the response rate for this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I'll open it up to any questions or comments from the committee. Vice Chair.
I have two. First one, could you expand a little bit? Why is law and governance on table 2 all the way down at 10%? If you could expand a little bit on that one, I think that would be helpful. And my second question is, could you expand a little bit on that last point? As you said in paragraph 11, you're committed to reviewing the operation of IG within BCP. Could you expand a little bit on what that would look like, what you have in mind there? Thank you.
Yes, so with the numbers, sadly, what we found, and this is my initial reaction in terms of our first look at where the numbers were for law and governance, that the requests that come through are sadly never simple. and they result with going across a number of sections to try and find the answer. And then what we then find, of course, that we are running quite late against the time to try and figure out what is required to answer. And then what we also find is that our resources are somewhat stretched, with people wearing multiple hats to try and get these numbers across the line in time. So our apologies for that. And what we're looking to do is to take a look at that, and that then leads to your second question. And one of the things we're looking at is, well, how well are we resourced is one of the things that we would be looking at. And so it is at an early stage, and we are planning to have our first, as it were, workshop on that matter next week. In fact, that's been scheduled in, that I'll be meeting with the head of service, and we're going to start outlining what that program looks like. So everything is under scrutiny, and the intention is that we will end up with hitting the 90 percentile is the hope.
And Chair, if I may add, information governance team sits within my directorate. I've also asked head of internal audit to include the information governance team as part of an audit plan. Internal audit should be offering us assistance in ways that we can look and review procedures, recommendations of how the service can be improved, and learning from the practice that we've got. So I'm hopeful that the head of internal audit has included this on an audit plan, and that way this committee will also receive the appropriate feedback from those recommendations. And I'm a firm believer that internal audit is here to support us and look for improvement, and that in turn helps Nigel in his statutory role as data protection officer, because it also identifies areas that which may pose a risk to him, and we can then inform this committee and inform the corporate management team as well. So sorry to put Nigel on the spot.
No, thank you very much, Janie. I appreciate that.
I am hopeful that internal audit will be able to assist us in terms of a review, and this committee can monitor that outcomes of that in due course.
Are your points answered? Yeah. Okay. I've got Councillor Phipps next, and then Councillor Tyne.
Thank you. Yes, looking at it, obviously at the moment, it's the performance is termed unsatisfactory. We understand that. And you just answered the question that you are looking at this review and heading hopefully towards making it satisfactory, which would be 90% or over 90%. Can you give us any idea of a timescale that you would like to achieve that it within? How soon do you think we might get to that?
Yeah, very interesting. So we have scheduled in the Information Governance Board's meeting. So one of the things we're looking at, and I'm really grateful to the new management team in Robin and with Janie, who've come in as head of service, and our director, that part of the work will be sort of sponsorship at the highest level across the board. So what we're looking to do is work with directors across each of the service units through to the heads of service. So what we're hoping to establish is stronger lines of ownership and accountability through that service, and commitments to reaching those targets. And then what we're there also doing as well is working our way up, as it were, with the information asset advisors who are on the ground triaging and answering the questions through the forum, so that we can then provide a better service. Also, what we're looking at as well are some of the other things which Janie has highlighted. We're looking at various policies and procedures as well. So these things, it's quite a robust review that we're looking to comprehensive review that we're looking to do. So it's every aspect of our operation, and we're looking to take a look at. My own experience has been such that I've been with other councils where we've had, for example, a really quite good case management system, and this allowed us to track and report so much easier than what we're finding at the moment, and also to report on that. So one of the things we're hoping to do is put forward a business case to support a revision, so we're moving in a more digitized way moving forward.
You come back here.
I just sort of asked for a timescale. I don't think you actually
Oh, sorry, yes.
came up with
timescale.
that. Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, what we're finding as well is that that initial conversation, as Jane's pointing out, we're having conversation with the audit and governance, the internal audit. So that's coming up throughout the course of this year. So what I'm hoping is that we will see an improvement this time next year.
Yes.
Chair, as the director responsible, I would say it will take a year. Partly because we have to allow internal audit to take for as long as it takes as part of the audit plan. It may be that they may need to return and review as part of that recommendations and improvements against the audit plan. It's also, I'm conscious that information governance is also a corporate service as well. So we also need to have the support from the corporate management team. Graham, as the head of paid service, needs to be reassured that the service is meeting the needs of the council, and likewise yourselves representing all members need to be assured that it is safely walking before it runs and carries on. So we just need to, I need reassurance as the monitoring officer and as the director that we are getting all the fundamental basics right. We're meeting the timescales that are set by the Information Commissioner, and that we're addressing any risks or loopholes as they are exposed or appear. Hopefully they won't. And so I'm thinking in my head it is at least a year. But again, because it's going to be part of the audit plan, this committee will probably has the luxury of monitoring on perhaps a more regular basis than perhaps you would others in terms of the progress, because obviously Nigel, as the DPO, is statutorily required to report to this committee on a regular basis. So that is my commitment to this committee as the director with responsibility. But obviously I want to be guided by the internal audit, and I don't want to do anything that fetters their discretion.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Tarley?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to substitute on such an interesting subject as the ICO target rating. I think Ms. Berry's just touched on the meeting the needs part of this, and the 90% KPI figure won't mean a lot to probably councillors or residents here. But Mr. McKinstry made a point about reporting back, when we get or that a requester, FOI requester or an EIR requester gets a response within the allotted period of some sort, with an indication of how long it's going to be until a full response is taken. I do agree that sometimes you can get an FOI that is very complicated, requires a lot of input. I know it's probably not a statutory requirement, but an indication of the response period, and not just how many were responded to in that period. So an average response time, or a long stop statistical representation of those that aren't responding at the time. What is the average response time for those that fall outside the period? Would mean a lot more information. However, I noticed Mr. Channer mentioned about a case management system, and I think most councillors, our drive for making it working smarter rather than harder, I think we'd probably support that. So I'd encourage Mr. Channer and Ms. Berry's team to really grasp that and take that on board. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to say thank you, Nigel, for providing such a full report. It's made really interesting reading. I was looking particularly at table 9, and I'm wondering about whether within the reviews and the complaints, whether data breaches are included in that, in those figures, because I couldn't see anything that was jumping out about that. And I think although it's important to be looking at response times, I think we also should be looking at, are there areas of the council, whether that's within internally or whether that's within our delivery arms and vehicles that we're working within, are there any risks there about data breaches? I'd just like to understand a bit more about that, and whether that's included in the review and what we're doing about it, or if there's a need for us to be doing anything about it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So my role involves looking after our data and protecting it. So they, over the course of the year, there will be instances where we think, has there been a data breach? And so what we find is that we are addressing that. We have a separate log, which again, as I pointed out, doesn't sit. It sits us kind of outside manually of this process. And so one of the things we're looking at with the with the internal audit is how does that data breach report system work? So that's one of the tasks that we're looking at, is to try and get that more combined into our reporting systems. So there will be, over the course of I don't have that number with me, but over the course there will be instances where we I would describe them as near misses, and then lessons learned from that. So, for example, it may well be that we've learned to ensure that when something's going out by post, it's done by recorded delivery. Things go astray. While it's kind of outside of our control, those items sometimes come back to us as lost items in the post. Or, for example, someone's put the wrong name in an email address, and being fortunate that it's sort of gone to someone internally within their own section. So, those are not exactly, but those sorts of things that can happen. And so what we're trying to do is learn from that, and then that's what forms part of the information asset forum, as well as the information governance board. Those are conversations we're having around those tables to ensure that we are minimizing our risks, the exposure to those sorts of risks.
Okay, thank you for that. Got no other indications of people wanting to speak. We've got a recommendation here, which for those who haven't got it in front of them listening online, perhaps I'll just read out. It's recommended that the committee note the information governance performance management information for 23-24, quarter 1 to quarter 3, December 2024, contained in this report. This includes requests received from the Freedom of Information Act 2020, Environmental Information Regulations, Data Protection Act, and other agency disclosure requests. And B, committee note that currently a review is underway by the leadership team of the function of IG within BCP Council. Don't think we need to take a formal vote, because let's say this is just to note. So thank you very much, Sir Nigel.
Thank you, Chair.
You're free to go, as it were. Moving on to item 7 on the agenda, risk management, corporate risk register update. This report updates councillors on the position of the council's corporate risk register, and there's main updates as set out on the agenda. Graham Farrant, Chief Executive, is going to present that report to us this evening. So, Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So you've got the report, which is sort of an update on what's been done in quarter 4. And then Appendix 1 is the risk management process on a page. Appendix 2 shows how we score things. And then Appendix 3 gives us the detailed table of the corporate risks. One of the things I think we do need to look at is the numbering of the risks, because you will note that they are a bit all over the place, because we've deleted some as we've moved on. And we do need to think about the numbering, but we've presented them in that appendix in the highest ranked risk first. So they're not in numerical order. So if we need to talk through any of them, we might need to refer to the page number as well as the risk number. So the risk talks about what we've done, which is we've had we had some strategic priority planning days during February with the Cabinet, and we used that opportunity to go through the risk register in its entirety in terms of the corporate risks and really reassess them. So some of them have been given better titles to try and better understand what they cover. Some of them were combined or slightly reorientated. There's at least one new risk, which is the potential implications of the dedicated schools grant financial deficit. So that is the discussion about the high needs block, special education needs, and safety valve, all that stuff. Then we've added back CR8, which is our perpetual yo-yo risk, which is the risk of running a fair election. So every time we're coming towards an election, we put it back on the corporate risk register. When we have a period with no elections, we drop it off again. And then there are 4 new risks or rehash risks, which we're working on the detail now. We'll bring to you at the next time we bring the corporate risk register. One has been de-escalated. Just to remind members, the corporate risk register are the high-level ones that we managed corporately, there are also detailed service risk registers. So each of our service has its own risk register. So in this case, the failure of the local care market, we've determined now should come from being a corporate risk down to being a service risk. So that will be managed within the adult social care service. So we haven't disposed of it and thrown it away completely, but we do occasionally de-escalate or occasionally escalate. CR20, I think, adaptation and migration of the negative impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, etc., was one of the risks that was talked about at this committee in January. We've updated the risk now and put it forward, but we'll produce a further update of that. There is an updated risk in Appendix 3, but we'll have to give more detail on that when we need to. And we have changed some of the risk scores. One of them we believe, we only believed after we published the report, was probably an error, which is the upgrading of the disruption to IT systems CR4, where the score went from 6 to 12. When challenged, the author has said, actually, no, we think it should have been 6. We think that was an error in the scoring. So it is a significant issue. Members will know that cyber attacks are happening across the board, and particularly at public sector organisations, but we feel that that will probably be reviewed next quarter to go back down to 6. And the other one that's changed is the potential of climate change to outstrip our capability to adapt. It's gone from 16 to 12. It's also been reworded, and we think that the rewording is probably what's responsible for us taking that down a level, rather than the inherent risk of climate change hasn't moved. But we think the way the risk is now presented is what's changed it. So that's a sort of quick thumbnail run through, lots of changes. It is something we actively monitor. I should give Fiona Anton's apologies. The reason I'm presenting is Fiona isn't here. She's suffered a family bereavement. I'm sure you'd all extend your sympathy and condolences to her. She does a sterling job on this and contacts each of the corporate risk owners at least twice between meetings when it comes to the audit committee. So there is a constant review of the key corporate risks. One of the things I think we need to address as a council is it comes to audit and governance committee. Should it go to the cabinet, for example? Should it go to the council? Do we think enough about the corporate risks and the way we manage that as a corporate whole? So I think audit and governance committee has a role to play, but that shouldn't be the only place that we consider it. So we do consider it CMB, but we don't then consider it in any other public facing meetings. And I'll just question whether we might need to do that as part of the next evaluation.
Okay, thank you for that. And Graham, if you could pass on from the committee our condolences to Fiona, and also, that we are very grateful for the hard work that she puts in for the risk management, which is very valuable work for us. Any comments or questions from the committee? Lindy.
Good evening. On page 45, I'm referring to risk CR15. It's the number 1 risk at BCP on suitable talent attraction, retention, and succession planning. On page 45 at the bottom, the risk response strategy is marked as tolerate or accept. So my question is, the only time that you can tolerate or accept a risk is when the residual risk exposure is within the appetite, and that's definitely not the case, as it's 16, the highest, the maximum rating, or if the cost of implementing additional controls are so excessive relative to the benefits earned that it doesn't make sense to implement controls, which I also highly doubt, as the risk impact, as listed on page 44, refers to industrial action, grievances, absences, high turnover, etc., etc. So the cost of maintaining this risk is definitely, it's employee cost. It's a massive expenditure for the council. So I don't know if it's just a tick mark error, but seeing that this is the top risk at BCP, I don't think we can tolerate or accept it. It should definitely be at least treated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Graham, you might need to check with Fiona on that when she's back.
Yeah, I think that's a good challenge, actually. But I suppose part of the issue, particularly with attracting staff, is that there are only so many levers that we can pull. And through pay and reward and through those other mechanisms, we are changing those and adopting as much as we can. One of the challenges that we have, though, is that it's difficult to attract people to the area, particularly for lower paid jobs. So for senior managers, the cost of relocation may well be tolerable. For some of our more junior roles, we do find it a struggle to get beyond our immediate catchment. So if you think about the population of BCP as being 400,000, there's probably 500 to 600,000 people that are within travelling distance of the council's area. That's not a huge population from which to be drawing 5,000 staff. So I think the part of the challenge back would be actually there is some degree of where we have to tolerate the risk, because there are limits to what we can do in terms of attracting people in. But if I may, I'd like to take that back and think through that and talk it through with Fiona, but also with Sarah Dean, see what else we could be doing and whether we could express that in a different way.
Thank you for that. Sarah Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's a couple of points regarding that report, actually. Firstly, just to note that it's difficult to assess, looking at the report, which kind of direction that we're heading in with regards to the risks, because it doesn't show that, the arrows are helpful, but being able to see that across the whole year or previous years would be even more helpful. There's a risk that I can see on here that I'm not sure whether it's been discussed in the planning meeting that you had, or whether it's just been missed. But certainly, according to what goes on within my inbox, and I know that of my colleagues, something that is missing is the risk, I think, of us as BCP not meeting our statutory requirements to house and support people with regards to housing and homelessness. So I'd just like to have that on the record as well. And obviously a concern about what you said, Graham, with regards to CR20, and that change of wording has meant that it's downgraded the risk, because it's a massive risk. In fact, it's been at the top of our corporate risk register for some time. So I think, given the fact that we don't have an adaptability strategy or a member of staff that's supporting that, I think it's premature to downgrade it, and it needs to come back to this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So to respond to the housing one, that is an issue that I believe should be on the housing service risk register. That's probably the appropriate place for it. So I will check that has been picked up in the housing service. And I'll send an email, which you won't have seen this afternoon, saying that. The other one, again, let's take that back as a challenge. We are looking at the structure that we've got to deliver on the climate change agenda. At the moment, Isla is restructuring that team, making sure we've got the right resources to bear. I think that might help us take a different view, but I'm happy to take that back as a challenge.
Okay, question.
Two questions and a comment. The first comment that I agree that I think they should go to cabinet. At least I'm thinking about full council as well. Perhaps that might not be the right forum, but I think certainly I would support it going to cabinet. A quick question on CR03, failure to ensure adequate information governance. I wonder if you could have a think about, further to our last conversation about our last item on the unsatisfactory levels. Perhaps there's a question of that to return. It was removed in 2020. I wonder if there's a case of that coming back. And my other question is about CR02, appropriate outcomes, quality for service for children, young people. I see that you've decided to merge them. My experience of risk registers is that their benefit is by allowing you to be precise in the way you crystallize the way you think about these risks and the plan to treat them. And I worry that something might be lost in the merging of them. It seems like quite a nebulous risk in the way it's talked about, and the action plan to deal with it covers a huge number of different areas. So, it looks at SEND, it looks like. Could you expand a little bit on the rationale for merging it, and whether you think that is the best way to think about all the different sub-risks within that one?
Thanks. So certainly on the last point, I'm happy to talk about that. The issue that we found was that we were beginning to put the same explanations in both risks. So it was duplicating what we were doing. What, of course, we do have within Children's Services is a complete risk register with much more detail than broken down. I'm just wondering whether Audit and Governance Committee would want to see some of those risk registers for the services in due course, whether we should bring one or two of them on rotation, just to give you the flavour for those, because I think that's where absolutely the answers to those questions absolutely will be in the Children's Services risk register, because they do break down the individual risks. They'll do them by service, whereas here this is coming together at the corporate level, and when we had the two, we did find we were beginning to put the same sentences in both, and then you've constantly tried to say, well, can you reword that so it doesn't read the same? But it was the same issue. So it didn't feel very satisfactory. I think the other bit about information governance, let's take that back as part of Janie's review, and let's see if we can pick that up there.
If you could discuss with Fiona Manton, when she's back, about, doing on a rota, that'd be very useful. Councillor Tarley.
Yeah, thank you. Last time I was definitely on this committee, I did actually extend a hand to Fiona and to Nigel. I met with both of them to talk about risk management. Just wondering about, I agree 100% with Councillor Connolly with, I think, a single page plan on page presented at least to Cabinet. But I'd like to see if there's some sort of P50 or P90 analysis done on probabilities, done on it and presented as part of that into the financial impact of these risks. So when you Monte Carlo the risk and it's in line with central government standards, that you actually put a financial outturn on some of these risks. And I see Councillor Connolly's nodding because I expect she probably does it in a day job as well. That we see that on the bottom line as well. The impact of some of these, especially not every risk, but certainly the headline that we've got presented here. Another column presenting the P50 and P90 profiles for those risks. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the calculation of the impact scores, we do have some degree of gradation by financial scale. But you're right, we don't do that, don't do the technical analysis as it with each of the risks. We tend to do that as sort of an overview of what it might look like. So I'm happy to have a look at the methodology for that. I think there's a point made earlier on, I think it was Councillor Armstrong, I'm not sure, about the direction of travel and the hours. I do sit on the board of a housing association, and we do have a presentation style there that allows us to see more about the directional analysis. So I will talk to Fiona about that. I've sent her the details, so we're having a look at whether we can present it to give a bit more of that feel about direction. These, as reports feel a bit static to me, that is whether you can get that sense of direction in the way that it's going. And I'm also really keen that we're clear about what level are we targeting and what is acceptable for the council by way of a mitigated risk, so that we know what that outstanding mitigated risk would be. And then actually, if we then applied some of those probability factors, the financial levels, you'd know how that stands against the level of reserves, for example, and about the financial resilience of the council, which might be a helpful calculation.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beasley, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Two comments, if I may. The first is to endorse the comments that have been made about the corporate risk register and its escalation both to Cabinet and to Council. It is something that I have said a number of times in the past. In fact, I thought this committee some time ago had agreed that it would be taken forward in that way, but it's definitely really an important step. A risk register requires buy-in and understanding, and I think currently that is unlikely to be the case across the council, or at least across the whole council. The specific that I wanted to raise is with regard to the changes between CR13 and CR25, into which it is going to change and will be presented to the next meeting of Audit and Governance. It's around transformation risk, and I just wondered, since my understanding of what's here is that it's already changed, but it isn't coming to us until the next meeting, what has actually changed? Has it been downgraded? Has it been reimagined? What is it that we should know? Because this is a very significant risk, and one that will affect the whole council and its services if it is not delivered as a programme.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I think that does to recognise the shift in the transformation programme, where we've effectively now changed most of the central functions, the ERP system, looking at pay and reward, etc., and then moving towards the changes in the services. So you now have, during this calendar year, new IT systems to be introduced for planning, for environment, I think housing over the next 2 years. So it's that shift from the central functions and the central organisation, which is what was funded through the transformation programme as first envisaged to now moving on to those services, and therefore the wording is a reflection moving from the transformation programme to the transformation of the services and the way the customers will receive them. So I think that's the intention behind it. I don't quite know why we haven't got them here. I think that might be a sort of corporate failing within CMB to recognise the deadline for audit committee to get them all written and updated for this. But that's the intention, is to reflect that shift in the emphasis in the transformation programme, which I think went to Cabinet yesterday, was certainly commented on at Cabinet, and I think has been requested to go to overview and scrutiny in May for further discussion on it. But that's where we are in terms of the programme. It's that shift from the first 5-year programme to what comes next.
Well, Chairman, that being the case, I think it would be very helpful to Audit and Governance if, as soon as ready, it could be distributed to members of the committee, because it sounds as though it will be enacted prior to our next meeting on the 30th of May, and there will be precious little time, if any, for us to discuss it, and indeed, if we felt there were some changes that needed to be considered, to make those changes.
Okay, can that be taken on board? Yeah. Councillor Armstrong, you indicated.
Thank you, Chair. It's with regard, I just want to comment on one of the new risks, CR16, about the risk of failing to secure partnerships and miss out on funding in the future. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about that and whether that is linked or should be linked to our transformation work, because I know that there was a work stream about partnerships and community that was taken out of the transformation programme, and I'm just wondering whether that will be put back in, or how is that risk going to be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you, happy to respond to that. I think this is a reflection of the time we're at, where we don't have a devolution deal. Many local authorities have a devolution deal. We don't have an agreed devolution forum in terms of configuration of other authorities to work with. We work closely with health, but we have struggled through the children's improvement programme to get real traction between Department for Education and Department for Health and Social Care, and the SEND programme. I think in the SEND statutory direction, we got confirmed that because the government actually took 6 months to issue that after the inspection, because they couldn't decide whether DFE could write a letter that had implications for DHSC, i.e. our health partners, or not. And in the end, after 6 months, decided they couldn't. So they wrote a letter from DFE about SEND, but which is addressed to both me and to the health partners. So it's all of those things. It's looking at the new configurations of some of the police services, some of the health services, where they're going to be, and making sure that we work more closely with them. My worry is that we're seeing a retrenchment in police, we're seeing a retrenchment in health, we're seeing a retrenchment in local government. Gaps are going to appear in the system. And what we want to do through this is make sure that we're addressing that as best we can, getting as much external funding as we can. The LEP is being closed down by the end of next March, the Local Enterprise Partnership, which we have with Dorset. So that changes support for businesses across the board. So, all of those things are changing, and we've got to make sure that partnership framework works for us. I think that's what that risk is going to pull together somehow and try to summarise. So some real challenges for us, I think, as a local authority in a very changing public sector environment.
Thank you for that. Question.
Can I make one more thought? Just having spoken to the monitoring officer, after what you said about bringing the service level register on the risk around young people and children, would it be worth proposing to the committee that we did a deep dive on that risk and then looked at the service level register for that one, and then maybe subsequently we could do a deep dive on another area? Is that something that's worth proposing now, and then finding a time in the year to do that?
I think, Graham, you might have a discussion with Fiona and perhaps with me and the vice chair as to whether that's something that could be undertaken, perhaps.
Yeah, very, very happy to do that, and I'll bring Kathy into that discussion. Let's work out the right time and the right way to do it. It might be more of a workshop in order to do that in more depth. Might be more appropriate than a formal sat around the table committee meeting, but that's fine. The right we're doing it.
Excellent. Okay, we've given that good airing to that particular item. The recommendation is that members of this committee note the update provided in this report relating to corporate risks, which, we don't need to take a formal vote on that. So thank you very much for that. Item 8 on the agenda That's the internal audit charter and audit plan 2024-2025, and Nigel Stannard will present the report. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. This report sets out the audit charter and audit plan for 24-25. So firstly, turning to the audit charter, which is shown at Appendix A, having a charter in place is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards, and it sets out the scope, the purpose, the authority and the responsibilities of the council's internal audit team and the individuals within it. Putting it more simply, is how we plan to operate and act. The BCP Council Internal Audit Charter is subject to an annual evolutionary change process, very similar to the series of policies you considered at your last committee. Changes, again, are shown in red text and they stay in the live document. And this year, those changes are quite modest, actually. So just going through those ones I would like to point out. Firstly, at paragraph 14 of the charter, that's on page 91 of the pack. I set out some strategic focus areas for 24-25 over and above business as usual, if you like. And the key one is the data analytics audit strategy, which starts on page 110. That continues to evolve, and in an environment where internal audit can't possibly consider everything the council does and give assurance on everything the council does, I see data analytics can build up reporting systems and give the opportunity for continuous assurance. They can highlight exceptions and variations in data, which in turn can lead us to identify anomalies, error and fraud in much closer to real time. To be clear, however, data analytics cannot and does not replace internal audit work. It's just an additional tool we have and presents opportunities for greater efficiency and effectiveness. Please also note paragraph 18.9. Although this is flagged in red text, it does just formally confirm what is happening already in custom and practice. We realised that the charter did not actually specify that all our reports as a default should go to the relevant corporate director. Obviously, this is the most senior officer and member of corporate management board, and they should always see audit reports, to my mind, in the services they lead. Finally, on the audit charter, can I just touch on internal audit and the chief internal auditors, in other words, my independence? This is set out in paragraph 11 on pages 88 and 89. You're probably aware that I manage other service teams as well as internal audit, and paragraph 11.4 sets this out. So when these services are audited, my deputy chief internal auditor manages the audit, and I have no involvement at all in that audit to try and put up that Chinese wall, so to speak. So finally, turning very quickly to the audit plan 24-25. As a committee, you were consulted in January on the table. You saw a very similar table to the one that's on page 77. And based on your feedback and some other fine tuning, the strategic level audit plan, as we call it, is presented for your approval tonight. We then go into some more detailed appendices, B, C and D, give some more detail. And further to Janie's comment earlier, if I just refer you to Appendix C and page 117, you can see that information governance report that audit that Janie and I alluded to earlier as a first quarter. Indeed, it's already ongoing, actually. The field works commenced. So you can see that audit in that first quarter set of audits we plan to do. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. Any questions? Jane?
On page 77, the audit hours set out. I just had a question on the leave time, because during the presentations made in January also, it is stated 13 to 14 FTE, and the leave there looks excessive based on the 13 to 14 FTE, and also the core audit hours are only 43% of the total days available. It seems like it's not in terms of standard practice that goes up to 80% of available days to have core audit hours. I'll pose my second question, Chair, after the answer.
Nigel?
Yeah, the 535 leave total does include bank holidays as well as annual leave entitlements, which for most of those audit staff are 30 days. So you know, the numbers do add up. Referring to the second element of that question, I think it's probably an issue of categorization differences. You know, we call it core audit work, but you know, to all intents and purposes, corporate assurance work and governance work is also core. You know, in anybody's business, that is very, very important. So I think it might just be the different headings that we tend to use in the government one in this particular plan, Lindy. So but happy to talk you through that outside the meeting if you prefer.
Your second point?
All right, so if the other audit hours are included, it still then only adds up to 58%, but I think it's a bit late now to dig deeper into the hours, as it's quite similar to the previous year. I just picked it up today that it's a bit low for productivity. On page 115, it would have been useful if we had a link to where you've stipulated the days per service area, how it links to the risk registers, the corporate risk registers and the operational risk registers. I thought the comment made of operational risk register to bring it here is quite a good suggestion. It's very difficult to give comments on a plan for the next financial year if you've never had sight of the operational risk register. And it's difficult to follow through whether the high risks, all the high risks were indeed covered if it's not linked. Also, there's no small scope, even if it's just a few words on what will be covered. It's just a day, so it makes it difficult to give me assurance that indeed all the risks are looked at during the audit. On page 122, the fraud risks are a better, you could better follow that to see the scope and the risk on the fraud risks. So I would have thought that the normal corporate audits would also follow a similar suit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jenny, Lindy. The allocation of days is broadly on budget and an assessment, our professional assessment of, you know, core issues like financial quantum, but also we take into account other sources of assurance. So children's services is a really good example, because at the moment we are heavily invested in an improvement board, and we also have external inspections regularly from Ofsted. We've tended to do less work because we've got scarce resource. So because there is a form of assurance coming from that process rather than, you know, internal audit, there would be an element of duplication there. So some of the nuance of aligning pure finance risk or, you know, perceptions of scale of the end, that you've got to take those nuances into account. In terms of our high risk assessment is very dynamic. gone are the days where we put an audit plan together and said, we're going to do 71 audits this year, and these are them. We work much more to a quarterly basis now, and we broadly allocate resource area to children's services, to environment, and say, okay, when we get to those areas, what are we going to do as a result of a discussion, review of risk registers on a dynamic basis? Because we might review risks today and they're different in 6 months' time.
Thank you for that. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. I'm looking at page 122, and partway down, there's a heading of grant awards, and the risk. And the column at the end, as you go along, says that there's nothing for 24-25 under that resource. But obviously the award of grants are still happening in various ways. The example there obviously includes the COVID one, and you will very much recall, and it's no secret that I had quite an issue with something in my ward that was audited, that came to actually did come to the Audit and Governance Committee that year. So what I think this, from what my experience of what can happen with grant awards, that I believe can be potentially not right. I don't know. Well, you have to wait and see how it all goes. But what I want to know is the audit changes that have been put in on page 91. Would they pick up on this type of thing in the future? Stop things happening with grants that potentially shouldn't be happening, that they are allocated where potentially they shouldn't be? Although there's nothing under the resource for that on that page.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. This particular appendix on page 122 is the specifically the corporate fraud work we are going to do. So that would be very targeted against specific grants coming in. The grants that do come in at the moment, we tend to have a process at the end of it through grant certifications, and Graham and I have to sign several key grants off through normal business as usual. There's set grant conditions, and we have to put our name to a document that says the BCP Council have complied with the grant conditions, and we need to send that off to, and obviously my audit team do some work to enable me and Graham to give that assurance. So all of that work is embedded in the business as usual audit plan. For a nuance grant or a one-off grant, we would consider that in any high risk area that we were doing in the audit plan. So when we come to scope a particular audit in a particular area, the conversation might go, have you had any new grants? What are the risks? And then that might well feature in our scope in that particular audit.
So if there was that sort of thing, which obviously COVID came up as a specific here, would that then come to audit and governance that we would be made aware of there was a high risk grant facility, or how would we know anything about it, or wouldn't we? Or is that just dealt with internally and that's it?
It would be reported in the next report we're going to, agenda item 9. So my quarterly update, I would bring that sort of information there, saying this new grant's come in. We've decided to do some audit work on it because we consider it high risk. So that would be where it gets reported to audit and governance.
Nigel, obviously some of these grants obviously filtered down often from government, and they come with a criteria which local councils, unitaries or whatever, are required to adhere to that criteria in giving the grants. I think the one that Councillor Phipps was alluding to came with lots of conditions and requirements which weren't set up by BCP because it was done during COVID, done in a rush, I suppose, looking backwards. So some of the grants that we are asked to give out come with strict rules, which we have to apply presumably.
That's very correct, Councillor Andrews. I think it's fair to say, and Councillor Phipps alluded to it, because of the unique situation in COVID, some of the grant conditions that came down from government were loose. You know, we've heard in the COVID inquiries that some of the, you know, and there is a perception that money has been wasted nationally. And obviously, you know, in the particular example Councillor Phipps is alluding to, the Bayes team specifically audited that one. We were not required to audit that as a council. The Bayes team, government team, said we will audit that one by sampling, and we did make a couple of suggestions to Bayes to include certain grants in their sample.
Yep.
Just to clarify that you are absolutely right, that there are stuff that comes from government has set criteria, but with this one it was completely different. It was very loose, and actually BCP then set its own rules or whatever, but made its own document up on it as well. It was a different situation, this one.
Lindy?
To take the discussion back to the response from Mr. Stannard, I am quite concerned about the audit plan and the way the hours or days have been allocated. I've got, I understand that a plan is not static, it moves with risks as it moves. But surely you should have a starting point that's based on risks, and the fact that the scope will still be discussed at a later stage. I've got no idea then, if you don't have a scope, how did you determine how many hours an audit will take? So then the hours in the plan is very loosely based. And then my next question would be, does the internal audit staff keep timesheets to base the audit hours on from previous audits?
Absolutely. Well, answering the last bit first, absolutely. Full timesheet analysis to the hour by internal audit staff. We use an internal system that's we've designed, so we don't pay an external supplier for that system. But the audit plan is at the start of the year is strategic in the sense that it sets out a broad allocation of hours only, and then individual scopes of individual audits. You know, we might have 70 days in environment, for argument's sake, and that may be one audit or 10 audits depending on the discussions in the year and how we cut that up. We might do 7 days here and 20 days there, and the scopes of those individual audits are determined at the time of those discussions.
Shaking your head, do you want to come back?
And I just want to have my reservations about the plan minuted, because you can't plan an audit without a scope and then allocate hours. You don't know if you're going to perform 10 procedures. It is based on a future discussion. So you don't know how many procedures you will have. How do you allocate the days to audit areas? Then it's spaceless.
It's a broad allocation. It's a rough estimation based on history. We've got an audit universe where we've got probably 400 audit titles, for use of a better phrase, that we're going to do over a rolling 5-year period. That audit universe will change because we might have new services, we might stop doing certain services, so we don't need to audit them in future, or we might do new things, so there would be new things cropping up on there. But we can't do everything in every year. The ones we do every year are called the key assurance functions, and they tend to be main accounting, key financial systems. Those are done every year. We know that we're much more tight on those ones. We know we're going to spend 20 days on key financials. Some of the other key systems like Mosaic, which is the social care system. So there are ones we definitely know, but the high risk ones are much more dynamic. I hope that gives you a bit more reassurance, Lindy, but maybe we could have a chat.
I think perhaps you can have a chat on this meeting, and it's you're raising interesting points which I think need to be drilled down upon. Councillor Claire Waite.
Does Mike Cox want to go first? If he's on the same point, I'm going to do a change of direction.
Yeah, sorry, Mike. I didn't know you want to speak on this one. Mike Cox.
Yeah, no,
portfolio for.
I think that's a fair challenge, actually, that Lindy's just come up with. So, if I can be involved in that discussion with Nigel, I think that's very good. I particularly think that we should be looking at risk when we come to do that. I'm assuming, Nigel, that there is a plan. You've got a staff plan of who does what and when. So that would I would imagine. I think that's what possibly Lindy's looking at, is that you've got a staff plan for the next quarter as to who's doing what and when, and that's just Appendix C is just a summary. But I'd be quite interested in looking at the risk of how these particular areas are chosen.
Okay, Nigel.
Yeah, I can do that, Councillor Cox, no problem at all.
Excellent. Councillor Claire Waite.
Hi, I have got the impression that the audit plan is based around risk, which is understandable, but also how much of it is responsive to the next report. So I'm looking in particular at bereavement services. There are clearly quite a lot of problems there, problems that may not have necessarily come up with the data analytics that you were referring to earlier. I mean, unless you go in there, you're not going to know that checks are kind of lying around by the sounds of it, and the safe is in a bit of a state. But I can't see that bereavement services is really featured specifically on the corporate risk register. So how are you kind of balancing looking at risks and also responding to areas where performance isn't that good?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor Waite, that the risk registers of all the service areas is a key driver for our discussions that we have in order to determine the scope for internal audit work. So, if I could do it sort of a practical example, using bereavement services as an example, my auditors would have an initial meeting with Kate Langdown before the start of the financial year.
So Kate
Langdown is the Director for Environment, where bereavement service sits, and we would say, okay, what's keeping you awake at night, Kate? She would highlight all the examples. We would then say, that tallies with your risk register, that doesn't tally with your risk register. And then through that judgment, we can say, okay, well, we think with our scarce resource, we will pitch our resource at bereavement services because you've highlighted a key weakness, or you think you've got a key weakness in your income at the moment. So that's the sort of practical way we go about constructing the high risk audit work.
You can come back if you wish.
Yeah, it's just a minor additional question. I just need to find the page that was on, actually, sorry. Yeah, so on page 113, mention was made of a data lake, ascertain information held within the data lake and how we might use this information within data analytics. I'm just not familiar with the term, and I wonder if you can explain that point.
Thank you. Data lake is a term that is a sort of bit of a techie term, I guess, and apologies for you, but it's an aggregation of all the systems and the information that the council has got in a particular form. So it's an aggregation of lots of systems. We might drag it off into a big spreadsheet or into other software to enable the manipulation of data more readily.
Thank you for that. We've got a recommendation here, which I'll read out. It's recommended the committee approve the internal audit charter and agree that the chair signs the document to record this approval. Second, approve the internal audit plan 24-25, including the detailed breakdown of Q1 audits. And finally, note the 24-25 budget for the internal audit service, which was approved by council as part of the 24-25 budget, setting the medium-term financial plan update in February 2024. Can I take it that we approve that recommendation? Yeah, we don't need to take a vote on it. So if that could be called out, that was effectively accepted unanimously. Thank you for that. Then I think we're moving on to item 9, which I think possibly is you again, Mr. Stannard. Internal audit, fourth quarter 2024. Sorry, 2023-24 audit plan update, Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, this is the so delivery of the 23-24 audit plan is well progressed, as you would hope, of course, given that the financial year has now passed on the 31st of March 24. Of course, our audit work does not neatly finish smoothly or exactly on the 31st of March. And some of our audit work, including our field work, straddles the financial year end. This report should therefore be very much seen as an interim year end position, and my Chief Internal Auditor's annual report, which will be presented to our next core meeting, will report all the final outcomes of these audits which straddle the year end. A reminder too that where audit fieldwork straddles year end, the audit forms part of both the old and the new audit plan, and is recorded as a 23-24-25 year audit for the purposes of reporting to this committee. This report follows the usual quarterly report format. It shows 11 audits have been completed, and that's on table paragraph 3. Of these 11 audits, there are 2 audits which were partial assurance opinions. The key issues found in these 2 audits are shown at paragraph 6 in the case of the Children's Services Section 17 expenditure, and at paragraph 7 for the Environment Bereavement Services income. In both cases, management have agreed all the recommendations arising from the issues, and they are now in the course of implementing these recommendations. The single person discount pilot continues to increase council tax yield by identifying and removing falsely claimed single person discount. The cumulative rolling recovery figure total is now at 244,000. You might recall that I expected the recovery rate to slow slightly, as we had initially targeted the higher rate and higher value cases first. However, to date, there is no significant drop off in the recovery rates. So that might imply that we will recover more as a result of this process than we initially anticipated. Please also note an important update on the progress of implementing the 18 recommendations derived from the internal audit review of the seafront pop-up arrangements, including the Bayside restaurant. 14 recommendations have been implemented, and the remaining 4 recommendations are contingent on the wider seafront strategy being agreed by Cabinet in June. I should point out, however, that several of the recommendations have been implemented in theory, and I have agreed with Amanda Barry that internal audit will continue to observe practical implementation when individual pop-up projects commence. By way of example, clear procedure guidance and new training has taken place, so staff are clear what expectations exist in matters. But until an actual pop-up project takes place, we cannot say that these procedures have been embedded and followed. I will report any exceptions where these recommendations have not been followed in practice to audit and governance in the future. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. I think obviously it's very useful additional income at £244,000 by applying the single person discount more rigidly. The other comment I would make from the chair is looking at the environment bereavement services income. You know, there's obviously considerable scope for sorting things out there. I was actually particularly surprised by the mention 2 or 3 times of the fact that they have been accepting cheques. You know, obviously it would be very useful in this day and age where people scan their plastic in their pocket, everything like that, that acceptance of cheques could be perhaps phased out at some stage. But obviously, you know, you've done the audit there and things have been discovered which need sorting out. But, you know, we still accept cheques then.
Cheques are still legal tender, unfortunately, Chair. So, and some people choose to pay by cheque. So we do actively encourage other forms of payment, but and that goes for cash as well, actually. So you know, of course, we do not prefer cash because cash needs collecting and banking, and we and the same for cheques. So but we do reluctantly have to take certain levels.
Sorry, out to the committee. If there's any comments or questions, Lindy?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. The first one is on page 132, where it states that the one audit was removed due to resourcing issues. Number 4, the commissioning. So my question is, somewhere I read that there was a £50,000 saving of vacancies due to vacancies. So the one side is, couldn't we use the vacancies to maybe in-source assistants to complete the audits? Or the second thing is on the table there, 1, 2, 3, and 5 was postponed or waiting new arrangements. Couldn't the time budgeted for those audits be used to perform the commissioning audit? So what I'm coming down to is that maybe if it's said it's postponed or you will not go on with this specific audit due to the fact that it's not a high risk anymore, it would have been one thing, but to say that it's due to resourcing issues, I don't think that's a valid reason.
Mr. Stanley?
Unfortunately, I think Councillor Cox will help me out on this one. The market for internal auditors is really tricky, and I would prefer not to have underspent my budget, and I would prefer to have done these audits. But it was a needs must scenario, and we've taken the audits out that we perceived was least risky and least risk. So it's just pure, you know, economies and resource availability, frankly.
Councillor Cox, you're indicating, I think, to speak.
Yes, I was. I had to say, I chuckled to myself when I heard the question. I'm afraid I 100% support Nigel in his answers. There is a serious resource issue in the whole auditing profession at the moment. So it doesn't surprise me at all that there's resource problems. There's resource problems in my firm and every single other firm that I've ever talked to, well, this year. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think Nigel's juggling as best he can. And the fact, and I was, one of the points I wanted to make was to congratulate him for getting himself an audit manager, which is quite an achievement in the current market. And the fact that we've got these 3 new trainees has also added to the resources that we didn't have a year ago. So, you know, we're doing quite well. I think NAS is doing very well at the moment, but it is a very difficult market.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from the committee? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions on 2 separate issues. So if I can ask, how do you want me to take?
I'll do the first one first.
Okay, the first one is on page 132, point 22 about developer contributions, the audit. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the scope of that audit.
Bear with me, Councillor Armstrong, while I get there. Page 122.
132.
Sorry, thank you.
It's the planned audits, the list of audits.
Yeah. I'll given that this is on a list of 20, 22, 25 audits, can I give you that scope outside of the meeting and cascade it out to the committee? Yeah.
So your second question.
Thank you. The second question is with regards to Appendix 2, and it's page 141. And I was encouraged to see the development of business case being part of the recommendations, and actually setting out what should be included in a business case for pop-ups. And it's just a comment, really. I just wanted to ensure that sustainability, that's included in the business case. That would be some kind of assessment that would be asking about the impact on the environment. We'll be looking at exploring things like water usage, food waste, energy usage, air and noise pollution, rubbish recycling, that kind of thing. And also including our social value statement in keeping with our statutory responsibilities under that Act. So thank you.
Mr.
I am pretty certain that the template that Amanda's team have designed to be the skeleton for the business case does include all of that, but I will provide you with those templates so you can physically see that assurance.
Lindy.
Right. So seeing that we're in the last quarter for the audit plan to be executed, I would like to know what percentage of audits were finalized versus planned as at the end of March. Then my second part of my question is about one of the audits done on the network security. I think there was I think we should get further feedback on the finding or recommendation 7, which talks about the vulnerabilities with older public facing systems. So some of the older systems, it seems like it doesn't have any firewalls, and the management did accept the finding, and they were busy with discussions with the third party, but maybe just to get feedback again in the next meeting how that's going, because I personally, for me, it potentially could be a high risk. It is listed as a medium risk, and I'm sure internal audit has got the reasons why it's medium. But for me, any firewall issues and vulnerabilities can lead to much bigger issues. And then my last part of my question is on page 129. I've got a concern about the number of high findings that increased by around 150% from the previous year, 7 to 18. And then also in total, the increase of 125 to 176 There's a 40% increase in the total findings from internal audit from the previous year, and it's a bit of a concern for me. Thank you.
Stanel.
Yeah. Just taking the last bit first. The number of my auditors. I don't want to create any perverse incentives for my auditors to either not make recommendations or make recommendations just to chase numbers. So it's my role and my manager's role to make sure that recommendations are truly relevant and appropriate and needed, frankly. And what this does for me is, because we don't do cyclical audits, or rare, only a few things like main accounting and so on, and it comparison year to year is actually quite tricky and somewhat meaningless. What I use it for is, does the number of recommendations give me some comfort that we are tackling the right areas and the high risk areas? I would be really concerned, for example, if our recommendations drop right off. There might be good reason, but I'd be really concerned, because it might mean we are not looking at the high risk areas, and we're not, providing that added value to the council by, making recommendations and making improvements in systems and areas. So that's what I use these numbers for. And direct comparison year on year is somewhat meaningless.
All right, then
Go move on, but one final point. Yeah.
Yes, okay, so just my two parts of my question was not responded to about the firewalls and the percentage of audits finalized versus planned. And then on the comment from Mr. Stannard, so I think it's more directed, it's not an indication against internal audit, it's more directed to the assurance this audit committee gets from the controls at management level. So if the findings have increased, then surely our assurance is a little bit less because there's more findings. And then with the comment with regards to the focusing on high risk areas. So the risk is basically based on your impact and likelihood that a finding might occur. So I thought you wanted to say something. So if you focus on the high risk areas, it won't necessarily result in more findings. The only time that it will result in a finding is when the control is either ineffective or inadequate, and not because you are focusing on a high risk area. A high risk area is something that there's a possibility that something might go wrong. And it's high because the impact is high or the likelihood is high, not the fact that it's a high risk that the control is not working. So that's just a side comment. Thank you, Chair.
Before Mr. Side comments, I've got Mike Cox wanting to chip in. Mike?
Well, I was just going to say exactly what Lindy, I think, has already outlined, is that to an extent, the fact that they've gone up is not a bad thing. I think that means, that more is being looked at. I mean, and it does depend, I think, as Nigel has said, on in what areas they've gone for. I mean, the fact that they've chosen bereavement services, we have known for a while that there are problems in bereavement services, and so it does not surprise me at all that there are some high recommendations in that, and that's I'm glad that they've gone into that and they've delved into it and made recommendations, because we've been aware for quite a while now that there are problems there and they needed to be sorted out, and this is part of the solution.
Thank you, Chair. I will refer back to one of my earlier questions answers as well, because the high risk emphasis is that's just one element of how we determine what we're going to look at. I'll use a silly example. The arcade in Bournemouth is cash, and in the overall grand scheme of BCP Council, that is not a huge cash cow, but it's cash, and therefore the risks associated with cash are much higher than risks associated with bank transfer payments. So we would look at that on a more frequent basis than some other much larger sources of income because of the inherent cash risk. So it's not quite as simple as high risk versus so it's a much more nuanced and professional judgment process that we go through. And Lindy, just to emphasize on your firewall comment, I don't think there was a question there. I will definitely bring a sort of update for the next committee on that one.
Last comment from the Vice Chairman.
Yeah, doing quickly, add a few comments. When we do this deep dive we talked about on children's services, perhaps there we might also look at some of the internal audit recommendations on children's services, if that is part of that discussion. Naturally, I assume it would be, that would be helpful. On Bayside and pop-ups, I think, thank you for confirmation that you're going to return to us as soon as you have information on the outstanding recommendations. I think that would be helpful in autumn. And I just had one final comment, which is on you commented that some of the recommendations, it's hard to demonstrate that they have been completed if they haven't been tested in anger, as it were, and how will we know that the policies are now robust? This is one for maybe for the service areas rather than you, but I know some organisations try to kick the tires on these new policies in place and be a bit creative with new exercises, like doing a fire drill sort of thing, or running through what would happen if someone had this mad idea, and how would that work its way with the new policies, that sort of thing, just to kind of kick the tires on some new policies. So it's just a request to pass that on and see if more work can be done to test those policies that are a bit hard to confirm are completed. If that makes sense. Thanks.
Mr. Stannard, you.
Yes, I'll definitely liaise with Amanda on that good suggestion.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a recommendation here. A, note progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 23-24 internal audit plan. B, note the explanations provided and determine in the case of high priority recommendations not implemented by initially agreed target date, if further explanation and assurance from service corporate directors required. And C, note progress against implementation of the recommendations of the review of pop-up temporary activities, including Bayside, and that will be after, I think, the June cabinet meeting. So, whatever our meeting is after that will be sort of have a feedback from you. Okay, I think that's noted from the committee. No actual decision to be made, so we've noted that item. So that concludes item 9. Thank you. So moving on to item 10. That's the review of the council's constitution. There's a single recommendation effectively from the Constitution Review Working Group. The chair of that has changed since our last meeting. The vice chair of this committee has now taken on that task. So Eleanor, I think you can present this particular item. You may want to read out the recommendation initially, but it may need some explanation as to why this particular tweak has come about now.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't planning on. Could you bring your microphone closer to yourself, please? Sorry. Yeah, no, I wasn't prepared really to speak to this item. This is new being chair to this working group, but you all know the working group's subgroup of us just talk through some of these items before they come before the committee. Now this one on budget and policy framework. This has come from the DLUC Best Value Action Plan and concerns raised previously about the risks associated with potential for last minute changes to the budget and the lack of scrutiny that might entail from that. So, and I understand that this is something that many other councils and local authorities have in place in their constitution, this process for what happens when full council disagrees with the proposals put forward by the leader, and just to have that enshrined in the constitution. My view is that anything that improves and makes this more robust is a positive thing. Ensuring that there's a mechanism for that scrutiny and trying to minimise that risk of last minute changes to the budget proposals. We've heard from the external auditors report previously, this is a risk that they've identified. So I think it's a good thing to have this in the constitution clearly spelled out. I think that there are other areas where we might want to improve the budget setting process. So this is not me thinking this is how I think the whole process should go in an ideal world. I see this as sort of a starter for 10. Let's get this into the constitution, get this new process, and then we built in review after 12 months to see how we felt after one normal budget cycle, and go from there. And it may be that there are other hooks to have other improvements and changes to the budget setting process other than in this proposed section 4E. It might be elsewhere, but let's get this in there and go from there. So that was what I wanted to say on it, and hand over to the monitoring perhaps and Richard first to talk a little bit about how it compares to other councils and why we have to do it.
You, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair, for the introduction. You've covered a lot of what I was going to say, actually, so bear with me while I probably scan my notes. We have reviewed other large unitary authorities in developing this particular procedure rule. The Director of Finance, Head of Audit, Management Assurance, and the Monitoring Officer were all engaged in developing this, or contributing to the development of these rules. Just in summary, these budget and policy framework or the budget and policy framework refers to the financial and policy decisions that of the council, where the leader and cabinet make recommendations for budget decisions requiring council determination. So it's in relation to those. If council does not accept or fully accept the leaders or cabinet's recommendations, then that's when these procedure rules would kick in. And there's a useful flowchart on page 156 of the agenda pack that illustrates the decision route should in that scenario. And I think that's a useful flowchart. I think that was a comment back at the working group. As the Vice Chair has already advised, that if these procedure rules are adopted, the plan is to review these after 12 months of operation in spring 2025, and that to go back through the working group. But in the meantime, sorry, and this is what the Vice Chair was referring to, we intend to bring forward some additional meeting procedure rules for the operation of the procedures of the budget setting meetings, council meeting, and these will be considered by the working group before coming back to this committee for approval. The recommendations are set out on page 145 of the report, and if supported, would be referred to full council for final approval. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee. I pressed the wrong button there, sorry. Right, sorry, Richard. I've got a question. Basically, this is something that's come down from government. It's not something that we've suggested to ourselves. It's something that central government has filtered out to all local authorities as something that they should do to their constitution. Graham Farron.
Thanks, Chair. So I think this was something that came out of the best value review, and I think it was something that we put into my review on Susan Zeiss, the former monetary officer's request. So it was a suggestion to clarify things.
Right. So it's emanated from us.
Self-inflicted, I think.
Self-inflicted, right.
Chair, if I may just add to that, having clarity around our budget and policy framework is a core component in vast majority of councils' constitutions. It sets, as you all know, the constitution is our public statement of our governance structure, and obviously delivering the budget is a key component of the functioning of any council, including this one. So the aim is to give clarity, and it gives options around what to do if you disagree with the recommendation that comes from the leader and the cabinet. The issue that we've got as well is conscious that Councillor Connolly has referred to this, is that we also do need to look at the rules for delivering budget council. The vast majority of councils have bespoke rules about delivering the budget, so that the budget is the key item on the agenda. It's the key focus of concern for a specific budget council meeting, rather than the budget being either not having sufficient time to be debated, or it is clouded with many other items of business. So budget council and is a standalone council. It is recognised as one of the key core meetings that any council has, which occurs in February, because obviously setting a balanced budget is so important. So whilst this sounds a little bit legalistic and a little bit jargonistic as well, we're hoping that with the support of the Constitution Working Group, we can put some plain English procedure rules together which help advise members of the public, newly elected councillors, long-standing councillors, about how will the meeting run, about delivering the meeting, how long do people get to speak, what do amendments look like, etc., and just add a little bit more clarity. So because it's not an ordinary council meeting, it's actually a budget council meeting, which is a separate legal entity. Is that clear?
Can I ask from the chair? I'll bring in Councillor Cox shortly. The budget meeting that we had earlier this year, due to lots of other items being on the agenda, had to be adjourned. So it could be, the rest of the meeting could be concluded. I know some authorities only have the budget for the meeting, and because that's important to get that sorted. I haven't gone through every line of this tweaking of the constitution, the budget setting process, but is that suggestion from me, which I think the chair of the council might like as well, that it's only the budget should be considered within that tweak?
Yes. So ideally, my professional opinion, we do need a standalone budget council meeting that is so that the budget gets everybody's attention and that everybody has a full awareness around the balanced budget for the council. It is quite difficult to allow sufficient opportunity, especially when we've got 76 members, sufficient opportunity to everybody have their say on the budget when we also have, for example, 20 other items on the agenda, because people are often rushed. We also don't have a guillotine on our meeting, which means that members are sitting to midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, have done that previously, sat throughout the night, and obviously coming back for a second meeting also impacts on everybody's professional lives, personal lives. It also disjoints the discussion and debate over a significant period of time, which might not be helpful because, for example, unless you've made notes on your modern.gov, on your app, then you may have forgotten what it was that you wanted to say. And we do have to give the absolute extreme priority to setting a balanced budget. And so we have to focus once a year, I would suggest, in just looking at a meeting which concentrates everybody's minds to setting a balanced budget, but also gives everybody, all elected members, the opportunity to contribute towards that. Because so yes, we are aiming towards that and just adding more explanation and how we deliver our business.
Thank you. Councillor Cox, you'd like to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I welcome this. I think this is really good. As Janie's already said, this is probably the most important meeting of the whole year. In fact, I think it is the most important meeting of the whole year. And the more councillors that understand the processes and the procedures of how we arrive at the decisions, the better. I would remind you that possibly, I don't know, I might be wrong about this, but possibly the reason that it's self-inflicted is that the year before the last budget, we had a bit of a nightmare where a leader went off piste and tried to impose a new budget at the last minute. And that's, you know, completely unacceptable. And I would have hoped that this new policy and procedure would sort that sort of thing out.
So Councillor Cowan-Waite indicating. Oh, looking in that direction. Thank you, Mike. Charlie.
Thank you. I think you were sort of getting to the point Mr. Chair, with the obviously the amendment that came in sort of last minute, and I would hope that this sets out procedures for amendments of the budget or proposes alternative motions on the budget and gives a timetable for those. Something like, because I know I think every councillor was I think we got it dropped on us, was it literally a couple of hours before the amendment, the budget this year, and I don't think there's anybody who would have the opportunity to fully take in the implications of those things. So is there an intention to have a guillotine, as in a stop time for the amendments to the budget?
Again, I haven't read in detail myself the recommendations here, but Janie, can you comment on that question?
Yeah, should I just say that I think we should be clear that this recommendation here is quite tightly defined to the process for when full council disagrees with the leader's proposal. It doesn't go into all of these other areas that I think we want to see to improvements to the process. So things like the length of time, meetings, guillotines, process, things like amendment notices. It doesn't go into all of that. It's quite strictly limited to this flow chart on pages. Having said that, I think all of these things need to be looked at. So what we've done as a Constitution Review Working Group is we plan to send a survey out to all councillors in the next few months, I believe, getting some opinions on exactly some of these issues. And then coming together with a package of proposals. So looking at things like the length of speeches in regular council meetings, and then looking about how we might want to do things differently in budget meetings. And the idea is then we'll come together with a package of proposals and take them before A&G. And the idea is the surveys for councillors to all share their views on what they feel strongly about as well. So quite open questions for everyone's comments. We want to reflect things like the needs for start times and finish times of the specific council we have. So that's the purpose of the survey. But yeah, so the idea of this is a narrow recommendation really is for that process, for when the full council disagrees with the leader, make sure that's enshrined in the constitution. That's why I see it as a start of 10. Review it next year, but in the coming year, we plan to look at a lot of other ways of improving that budget setting process.
Thank you for that. Claire, wait, you next.
Yeah, my question's to Mike Cox. If you were a leader who wished to go off-piste, would you find yourself sort of disciplined by this new process? Is there any, or do you see any kind of loopholes that you might be tempted to exploit if you were so inclined?
Mike,
well, I'm not the leader.
You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Hypothetically.
I'm not the leader, so it doesn't. It doesn't apply to me. But the previous incumbent, but one, I think, of this particular post, my particular post, certainly was the leader and the portfolio holder for finance, and I think that situation cannot be allowed to happen in the future. I don't know if it's built into this, but it certainly should be that the leader and the portfolio holder for finance must be separate.
Okay, comment there.
Chair, if I may, if it helps, yes, everybody, if it's accepted by full council and it's incorporated into the constitution, then yes, everybody, including a leader, a future leader, would be obliged to follow this, because failure to follow this is a breach of the constitution.
Yeah.
So yes, it is. This is technical, but it's quite prescriptive in what must happen if, in a certain scenario, you follow the flow chart at the foot of page 156. So yes, it stops. I hate to use the word maverick, but it stops that kind of maverick occasion happening that takes everybody by sort of left field. So yes, everybody would be bound by this, including the leader.
Thank you for putting it in simple terms for me. I did get a little lost in the details. So to be clear, that Mike was saying that the leader and the portfolio holder for finance shouldn't be one and the same. That's not prevented by this. That's a separate issue. They can still be the same. That's a different issue. But whoever it is, the leader is bound by this. And I mean, there is still, I think, the risk that, you know, if a leader, so what would happen is the leader would have to take on board the comments made by council when full council disagrees with their proposal, and then have to come back to council with either incorporating their observations and what they'd like to see happen, or with an explanation as to why that's not practical, why they can't. There is still obviously the possibility of sort of forcing something through anyway and saying it's not possible and it's not. There is still that risk. So again, when we review in 12 months, we should think about whether or not we can tighten that and put more safeguards in place.
Okay, we've had a debate and discussion on this so far. Councillor Beasley, then perhaps we have somebody propose it.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make sure that we're being precise about this. And I'm pleased to hear the Vice Chairman make the comment about a proposal being tabled at the meeting regarding the undesirability, in the view of the current portfolio holder for finance, of that role being shared between the leader's role and finance portfolio. That will require quite a lot of thought, I think, before we leap into making that something that inevitably is going to happen. And I speak as somebody who was in the predecessor council of Bournemouth, held both of those roles for 12 years. So I perhaps have a little bit of experience on how it works in practice and what actually there are advantages and there are disadvantages. And from time to time, those get weighed up. But the second thing that I wanted to say, Chairman, is with regard to the comments made again by Councillor Cox regarding a former leader of the council, those proposals were not adopted. They weren't actually brought forward. So let's not sort of rewrite history because it's grown in the telling over the months that have taken place since. I just think it's important. I certainly wouldn't have supported those proposals, and I didn't support those proposals, but I think it's important that if we're going to make those sort of comments, that they are accurate, because this meeting is held on the public record, and we need to make sure, particularly since this is audit and governance, that we don't stray from the accuracy of the work that we're doing and the decisions we make and the comments that are made by members around the room and outside the room in the meeting. And the third point, and I just wanted to perhaps even get a comment from an officer on this, was with regard to the amendment that came forward at the last council meeting for the budget. As far as I'm concerned, a huge amount of work went into that, and like it or not, the timetable prescribed by the council didn't allow those amendments to come forward any sooner than they did. And so the efficacy of what came to council and the timetable by which it came need to be as accurately recorded as they can be. And I don't think it is right to say that anybody did anything wrong in presenting in that way. Indeed, going back to my 12 budgets proposed to the former Bournemouth Council, that happened every year. I managed to keep it within my stride and guide the budget through that process. And I don't think there was anything particularly difficult, unless officers wished to suggest that actually it wasn't done properly, because I believe it was.
Thank you for those comments from your considerable experience, Councillor Beasley. Thank you. Any other contributions?
Did officers want to comment on that? Because otherwise it's just left hanging.
I'm looking for anybody. Oh, Adam Richards.
Do you want me to comment, Chair? I will comment in the sense that just to highlight, document in front of you today is intended to be complementary to the current financial regulations of the council. And as the monitors officers set out, there are certain aspects covered in those financial regulations that deal with some of the aspects we spoke about that are not in this documentation. So it's important to bear that in mind. And what we have to reflect is that there are fundamental differences between alternative budget proposals and minor amendments to the budgets. And what we've seen in regards to the 24-25 budget, we did see some relatively minor amendments come forward. we were very clear beforehand as to what the constitution and financial regulations said with regards to such amendments. And to my knowledge, all the information that came forward was totally consistent with that framework.
Thank you for those comments. As yet, we don't have anybody proposing the recommendation that's come from the working party. Vice Chair, you've got Councillor Fitch, you're on the working party as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose it because I'm on the working party.
Second.
Councillor Castle got in first. He's on the working party as well. So we've got proposal, and it's been seconded, that the recommendation in relation to budget and policy framework approval procedural rules, proposed amendments to insert the new procedure rules into Part 4E of the Constitution and set out in Appendix 1 of this report be approved, and B, any necessary and consequential technical and formatting related updates and revisions to the Constitution be delegated to the monitoring officer. Is there any debate on that, Councillor Tarling?
Yeah, just will this come to full council for ratification?
Yes, we cannot, as a committee, change the Constitution. It has to be done by full council, even technically inserting a full stop to a sentence, I suppose. But yes, and I think what needs to be done at full council is obviously it needs to be made clear what this tweak, as I'm calling it, is. It's not the length of the meeting, it's not other bits and bobs which have been aired at the discussion. Those sort of things can come forward and be fed into the Constitution Working Party's agenda of items to discuss. But this one, as set out, needs to go to the next full council meeting, and I think that is 21st of April, 23rd, apologies. So if there's no debate on this, can we take a formal show of hands? I'll be voting. I think that's unanimous for everybody who's allowed to vote. So thank you very much on that. Item 11, I think that's the forward plan for 24-25 municipal year. I think Mr. Stannard, that's you to present that forward plan item.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our last meeting of this municipal year. So the appendix to this forward plan is next next municipal year. What it includes is obviously all the core things that we can't avoid because they are part of our terms of reference. But it also contains the extra or the non-core work, as we've traditionally called it. You'll recall that as the previous chairman, Councillor Beasley, started the call, so to speak, for the Audit and Governance Committee. Are there any items you'd wish to consider? And current chairman, Councillor Andrews, has carried that process through. So we have included at the bottom of the appendix the proposals for these ad hoc meetings, for these deeper dive sessions. Councillor Andrews has agreed that we probably can only do a maximum of 2 per session. So we've had to sort of straddle them through the year. And Councillor Andrews has also prioritised them based on the lists that you as councillors have presented. So we've tried to incorporate that. There were a few things on the list that, on reflection with Councillor Andrews and Councillor Connolly, they probably didn't quite touch the terms of reference of audit and governance. So Councillor Andrews may have conversations with the Overview and Scrutiny Chair, for example, on whether they would want to look at certain items, given that there are members on this committee that think it's worthwhile. So that's the forward plan for the next municipal year.
Any comments or discussion on that? What I would say is that obviously if certain things crop up during the municipal year which require our discussion, then yes, they can be certainly put into the extra meetings, and we have had training sessions tacked on to some of our meetings, and if things crop up during the municipal year, the floor plan can be changed. Councillor Wade. Oh, sorry, John.
Chairman, I just query the date of the 24th of July, because that's a Wednesday and not a Thursday. And it's normal for this committee to meet on a Thursday.
I did see that. I think some of the other dates aren't on a Thursday, but I don't know why. Maybe choose the availability of this room.
Chairman, it's actually coming to the calendars on the 25th. The invitations come out from Dem Services is Thursday the 25th. So maybe an error in the report.
Oh,
So we'll confirm that round to the committee.
yeah. Yeah, I think some, right. Thank you. I think it could be Appendix A has got the wrong dates as opposed to the actual booking of this room. Yes, keeping to a Thursday, if at all possible, would be preferable, clearly. Thank you, Councillor Beeson. But yeah, we can check on that. What I did do myself, I looked at those dates and put some of those dates into my diary already, so I'll have to change those. But Vice Chair.
Should we build in, as we said earlier, if we're going to do a deep dive into certain areas, should we build in a sort of a holding item for that potential for a deep dive into some area that we feel would be useful?
Actually, yes, I see on the meeting for the 28th of November, there's no ticks at all in the column there for any particular item. So there is quite a good degree of scope to put in some additional items. Mr. Stannard, if you could check the dates and particularly for committee members, reinforce what dates we have got. If some of those aren't actually a Thursday. Thank you.
Chairman, I think you'll find that they all are Thursdays apart from that one that I raised.
Thank you. Can we accept this forward plan as it's also already been emphasised? It's not there rigid tablets of stone. It's there. It's flexible. It's an indication of how we will be conducting our business over the next municipal year. It's very useful to have it as a starting point. And as I say, if things do crop up which we need to discuss, then they can be put into the actual agenda for further meeting. So can we accept that forward plan? Thank you. We've accepted it. That could be minuted. Thank you. And I think that is the last item on the agenda. It's 17 minutes past 8. Thank you for your attendance, people watching online. Thank you and good evening. I will now close the meeting. Thank you.